2021 Coachella Valley Virtual Business Conference. I'm Suzanne Holland, the Director of Riverside County Office of Economic Development, and I'll be your host today. We have a wonderful program lined up for you with honored speakers and presentations. We're being recorded, so you'll have an opportunity to rewatch and download documents. So go ahead, grab that second cup of coffee and sit back and enjoy. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our dedicated sponsors for their generous support. With their commitment to our region's economic recovery, the County of Riverside is poised to move the economic needle throughout our region. Our presenting sponsor and a great supporter, the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians. Buzzbox, City of Coachella, City of Indio, City of La Quinta, Luco Management, Mara Market Intelligence, MSA Consulting, Pacific Premier Bancorp Inc., Rivco TV, Ross Aviation, SoCal Gas, Sun Community Federal Credit Union, University of California Riverside, Vallarta Supermarkets. Thank you all again for your continued support. Small businesses make up 96% of Riverside County's economy. A great partner and a great sponsor is the Coachella Valley Small Business Development Center. The center is part of the Orange County Inland Empire Small Business Development Center network, comprised of over 100 small business owners and experts, ready to assist clients with one-on-one consulting and training. These services and programs are at no cost to our entrepreneurs and small businesses. Coachella Valley Small Business Development Center, growing within to win in Riverside County. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce a champion for Riverside County who continues to focus on quality jobs, economic development opportunities, and supporting our small businesses. Please join me in welcoming Supervisor, 4th District, Riverside County, Supervisor V. Manuel Perez.
Thank you, Suzanne, for that generous introduction. And once again, thank you to all the great sponsors that continue to support Riverside County. I really appreciate you all. And good morning. I am Riverside County Supervisor Victor Manuel Perez, and it is my privilege to welcome you to the 2021 Coachella Valley Virtual Business Conference and Economic Forecast. This conference is organized by our Riverside County Business and Community Services Department, teaming up with my alma mater, UC Riverside, and its School of Business. Our economic development team began this conference in 2017, and it has become an annual event we look forward to each year in April as we celebrate Innovation Month. It is always full of excellent information and a detailed forecast that gives us an outlook of our local, regional, national, and global economy and what is on the horizon in terms of future growth. As we heard from President Biden yesterday, the economy is on course for more than 6% growth this year, the fastest pace of economic growth in nearly 4 decades. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from great speakers. First, we'll hear from our new Riverside County Executive Officer, Mr. Jeff Van Wagenen. With 14 years of public service with the county, Jeff Van Wagenen became our County Executive Officer in February. He will share a vision for the county and the executive office. We are very fortunate to have him as our keynote speaker, Dr. Christopher Thornberg, Director of the Center for Forecasting and Development at the UC Riverside School of Business. I have leaned on Dr. Thornberg for his analysis and perspective, especially in this last year, as we all try to assess the condition of the economy and the shape of economic recovery. He always leaves us with a memorable takeaway, whether it's the importance of building more housing, the need to follow public health measures and everyone do their part, or the need to avoid miserableism. I remember that, miserableism. So I look forward to what you have to say, Dr. Thornberg. And I appreciate that Suzanne Holland, Director of the Riverside County Business and Community Services Department, which is now known as our Riverside County Office of Economic Development, is our MC, and will be sharing initiatives of our county's Economic Development Department. Since coronavirus emerged, going back to January 2020, but especially since March 2020, it has been a roller coaster ride with a lot of ups and downs. But know that support of small businesses and support of economic development has been a high priority and one of our key focuses, both for me as a policymaker, as well as the County of Riverside, which strives to be business friendly. After a year of unprecedented difficulty, we are finally seeing more hopeful signs of a turning point with the vaccines that will let us embark on new economic milestones. Every American 16 and above is eligible now to get one of the vaccines that are available, and locally, it's more convenient than ever to get your vaccine. You have to just show up. Appointments are no longer required. You can walk in. If you have not received your first dose of vaccine, after this conference, get your shot, and you will be protecting yourself, your community, while keeping us on the right track and keeping momentum in the economy. So my message is, vaccinate. Do not procrastinate. It has taken time, but we're now in the orange tier, the second best tier to be in, and that's due to the lower case rates and positivity rates driven by the vaccine effort. Along the course of this year, we were committed to helping all our businesses in any way we can. We formed a Riverside County Economic Recovery Task Force, which has provided valuable input to support businesses and reopen the economy and county. One of the programs that the task force provided guidance to us is the Riverside County Small Business Assistance Grant Program. We established this program through the federal COVID dollars that the county received. It provided grants of $10,000 to small businesses in Riverside County, whether the businesses was located in one of our 28 cities or in one of our communities that are unincorporated. This county program concluded in December, and it was $50 million that supported 5,000 small businesses countywide. $10 million of that came to the 4th District, which is Eastern Riverside County that I represent. We were able to assist 1,029 businesses in the Coachella and Palo Verde Valley. We estimate that this business assistance grant program in the 4th District supported over 3,122 employees and jobs overall. In addition to advocating for our businesses throughout the year, our county staff, our team of business consultants, along with our U.S. Small Business Administration partners, have worked one-on-one to assist any business needing help in the Coachella Valley Small Business Development Center, the Coachella Valley SBDC, which is located within our Riverside County Workforce Development Center at Monroe and Fred Waring in Indio. During the last calendar year, 2020, the Coachella Valley SBDC provided technical assistance to 1,160 businesses. They provided 3,304 consulting hours, helping businesses receive over $46 million in loans and helping start 14 new businesses. And that's thanks to the great work of U.S. SBA partners, as well as Suzanne Holland, Joaquin Tijerina, and Mr. Bob Wright, and our team of consultants who work to help businesses any way we can at no cost to the business. In the County of Riverside, we are focused on economic development and growth of our economy and community. What is key to this being able to move forward is infrastructure. Infrastructure is how we can have more affordable housing, clean drinking water, sanitation systems, safe electricity, parks and recreation facilities, and health centers for our communities, including what everyone's talking about, broadband access. There are lines that, once they are put in, we can get more built and our economy can develop further. Without infrastructure, that is very difficult. So I want to make sure to express that. As you hear about infrastructure proposals, that's one of the drivers of our economy and that a better future for our community. Infrastructure is investment, and we need more of that, especially to help our underserved areas catch up to where we should be. We strongly champion and advocate for infrastructure. In closing, Thank you once again for joining us at our virtual Coachella Valley Business Conference and Economic Forecast, and I look forward to the presentations. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Supervisor. We appreciate your continued support to drive sustainable economic development in our region as we invest in our county's future. And I too am proud to call myself a UCR alum as well. Now joining us is the new County Executive Officer, Jeff Van Wagenen. Appointed by the Board of Supervisors this past year, Jeff leads the day-to-day operations for 40 county departments with over 22,000 employees and a $6.1 billion annual budget. Thank you for being here today, Jeff.
Suzanne, thank you for the invitation. Good morning, everybody. And while we are giving shout outs to the University of California, Riverside, I am the father of a senior in high school who today is signing his letter of intent to go to the University of California, Riverside. We're keeping it local. And to all the folks who are dialed in today, I want to thank you for participating in this year's Coachella Valley Business Conference and Economic Forecast. We've been doing this for a number of years now, and this event is always an important one on our business calendar. But this year it feels extra special. Now, why do I say that? I've got 5 minutes with you this morning, so I have 5 reasons why we're special today. First is that this is the final big event of Riverside County's Innovation Month. April is traditionally celebrated here in the county as Innovation Month. Our Board of Supervisors designates it as such, and we celebrate a number of different business entrepreneurs, ventures during this month, and this is the capstone event. Second, it is the first big event of our new Riverside County Office of Economic Development. As Supervisor Perez mentioned, we have a name change of that group officially as of yesterday. Our Board of Supervisors acted on an item that came from Supervisor Perez to officially rename Suzanne's group to the Office of Economic Development. Now, most of you know that the county's been actively engaged in economic development for the region generally, and in this valley specifically, for a very long time. Most of you have worked with Rob Moran or Joaquin Tijerina or Bob Wright, and you know the value that we provide in partnership. As Supervisor Perez talked about the grants that were put on the street last year as COVID relief, many of you received some of the $46 million in small business relief grants that Suzanne Holland and her team put on the street. But we needed to underscore the fact that economic development was, is, and always will be a top priority of your local government. This group will also be working very closely, not just with the Board of Supervisors, but with me and my executive office. I am proud of this department, this new Economic Development Office. I've worked with Suzanne and the team for a long time. I've had a number of different jobs in county life. As the supervisor mentioned, I've been with the county for a number of years. One of my most proud efforts was as the managing director of the Economic Development Agency, sort of the grandfather of Suzanne's department now. And I'm really proud of the work that will continue. What's the third reason why I'm excited about today? It comes the day after another one of our signature events in Innovation Month, our Startup Fast Pitch competition. Yesterday was the finals of that competition, which is a regional competition for small businesses that are on the verge of great success and to make a significant impact in our area. The winner of that competition was one of our very own from Coachella Valley, 3C Health. So again, coming after a day, this is a good day for the Coachella Valley. The fourth reason is that we are now on the precipice, as Supervisor Perez mentioned, the infrastructure bill. They'll be working its way through Washington, D.C., but also the American Rescue Plan. Many of us know that that is the next evolution of COVID relief and recovery funding. Almost $500 million will be coming just to Riverside County government. Also, the cities will be getting their own allocation of relief funding. And I will tell you that means millions and millions of dollars will be flowing to businesses just like yours. The investment is now for results for years to come. Supervisor Perez and our Board of Supervisors is focused on making sure that we are using those dollars in the best possible way, that we are putting the money where it is most needed, and for those industries that were most impacted by the last year. And it is an exciting time for what's to come. Which brings me to the last point why I'm excited about today. It comes at a time when we are starting to feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. Now, the fact that we are holding this event virtually tells us that we're not back to normal yet. But as the COVID case numbers continue to fall, I feel optimistic. As COVID vaccination numbers continue to rise, I feel optimistic. As we begin to see life and commerce return to normal, I feel optimistic. And I know I'm not the only one that feels this way. As I meet with different public, private, and nonprofit groups across the county, this feeling of optimism is spreading, it's palpable, and it's real. Now, I was teasing Dr. Thornberg before I started that I haven't seen his presentation yet. So I'm optimistic that he will be optimistic. I am optimistic that the data supports that the future is brighter than the past. I am optimistic that together we will be able to make the future better than it has been, or what we can possibly imagine it to be. Now, with that, I know that you didn't come to see me, so I'll send it back to Suzanne so that we can hear from the man of the hour, Dr. Thornberg. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you for taking time to share your excitement and your optimism with us today. And now, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Christopher Thornberg. Dr. Thornberg is the director of UC Riverside School of Business, Center for Economic Forecasting and Development. He's an adjunct professor with a PhD in business economics from the Anderson School at UCLA. He's a founding partner of Beacon Economics and an expert in economic and revenue forecasting, regional economics, economic policy and labor, and real estate markets. Dr. Thornberg has consulted for private industry, cities, counties, and various public agencies, and we're thrilled to have him on our program today to share with us his expertise, which will help us navigate our economic future. Staff will be monitoring the chat section, so feel free to ask your questions for a Q&A at the end of his presentation. Thank you, Dr. Thornberg, for being with us today.
It is great to be here. Good morning, everybody. I can probably talk for everybody when I say I wish we were here in person, and next year we will be. But now we have, of course, the option of doing this particular talk virtually, which is pretty good news all by itself. So, lot to talk about. As always, I have slapped way too much material in my slide deck, so I'm going to buzz pretty quick. As already noted, Suzanne said, if you have any questions along the way, put them in the chat box. We're going to have some time at the end of this thing. For me, there are four big themes of today's presentation that I'd like to talk about. The first one obviously has to do with the pandemic itself, which we are really on the back end of. And there's no doubt we have to acknowledge the tragedy of this circumstance, the millions of families across the globe who've lost loved ones, have loved ones dealing with the severe health consequences that can emerge from this particular situation. And in many ways, we can think about this as a tragic global natural disaster. And that metaphor, this is a natural disaster, is actually quite important, because natural disasters have a completely different kind of impact on the economy than more traditional sources of business cycles do. Indeed, as I've been saying for the last year, the V, without any kind of major government intervention, was really already exactly what was going to be happening. There's just no doubt about that. But of course, when it comes to government reaction, they didn't just sit on the sideline. Indeed, a combination of the political environment combined with what I would call the overall miserableism, as Supervisor Perez noted, created a situation by which both monetary and fiscal policy not only was aggressive and rapid, one might say that it was excessively aggressive. Now, this will indeed ensure an even more rapid recovery. In fact, my title of my presentation lately has been Buckle Up, because it's about to be a quick ride. But with that in mind, there are costs to excessive monetary and fiscal policy. Whether we're talking about, of course, the enormous blowout of the federal government budget, the $7 trillion of new debt we're going to be adding, or, of course, the potential for inflation, or indeed the potential for a major asset bubble driven by all the cash floating around the economy. Indeed, we are going to be inserting instabilities into the next expansion that didn't really need to be there as a result of this excessive policy reaction. And then last but not least, we got to think about the long run. How has the pandemic changed humanity? And the answer is, it hasn't. And I get so tired of hearing new normals because, look, Epidemics have been with humanity since the dawn of civilization. And history tells us people don't live in caves, even after a serious epidemic. They go back to live their lives. But it is reasonable to suggest that this pandemic has accelerated underlying trends that were already in the economy. And that's important to think about because the implications for the Coachella Valley, the implications for, of course, the Inland Empire overall are truly profound and something that we need to think about. And indeed, I would argue overall, we need to start thinking more about the long run and less about the short run. But of course, even now, you know that the focus is basically all short run. So with that in mind, let's jump right in. For those of you around last year who've seen some of the other talks that I've done with UC Riverside, you can go back in time and remember what happened at the beginning of this thing. It hit, we didn't really know what was going to happen, but the panic when it did actually happen was palpable. And the panic just didn't hit the government and businesses, it hit economists. And you saw some of the most ridiculously hyperbolic negative headlines. A Great Depression-like crisis. 15 million households are going to be foreclosed on. Home prices are going to fall. The pandemic's going to scar the labor market for a decade. Well, again, it was not that kind of business cycle. And boy, things have started to turn the corner. There's finally been the recognition that this isn't as serious as people had initially thought. And you can see this is, I like this graph. It's the Wall Street Journal Next Recession Survey, of which UCR contributes. And this is the median forecast for overall growth in 2021. And you can see how it's gone up as time has gone along. Again, most forecasters have realized that the U-calls were completely inappropriate. And indeed, it looks like we're going to have a very healthy bounce this year. Why? What was so different this time versus last time? Well, it was a completely different kind of business cycle. And that's important. Look, back then, the Great Recession, that was generated not out of thin air. And at some level, that's exactly what happened with the COVID pandemic. It just kind of showed up. No one was expecting it. But back then, look, the economy fell into a recession because of what happened in the preceding years. Mainly an economy that was vastly overheated by the subprime bubble that had ripped through the economy. And of course, the Inland Empire saw that worse more than anywhere else. This time around, actually, the economy was quite healthy when we entered the pandemic. Back then, we entered the Great Recession with households up to their eyeballs in debt, record high debt to income ratios, record low savings rate. This time, we entered the pandemic with actually a record low financial obligations ratio and the highest savings rate in 30 years. Housing, last time around, massive excess supply of housing. And of course, we were on the back end of a huge amount of borrowing and home price appreciation. This time around, we came into a pandemic actually with a housing market that was a little bit weak. Not from a fundamental standpoint. The fundamentals of the housing market a year and a half ago were really, really good. It was really a more of a temporary slowdown driven by changes in tax policy. As for the recession driver, back then it was a demand shock. And this time it was a supply shock. And I know that sounds a little technical, but let me explain the difference. Back then, when I say there was a demand shock, all that wealth disappeared when the subprime bubble collapsed, and suddenly people didn't have funds. They had to rebuild their household wealth. And that meant you had to cut back on everything. And there was a general malaise across the entire economy, paired along, of course, with a very specific pain in industries like consumer finance and housing. This time around, it was a supply shock, not a demand shock. People didn't stop going to restaurants. They didn't stop going to Disneyland because they couldn't afford it. They didn't go because they couldn't go because of the pandemic. It's completely different because back then, remember, a general malaise across the entire economy. This time around, the lack of spending in certain parts of the economy went to other parts of the economy and overheated that. A completely different type of situation. We had parts of the economy really suffering, but other parts of the economy doing historically well, which is something you don't see in the paper very often, but it's absolutely the case. And as already noted, government stimulus back then, too little, too late. This time, too much, too soon. Completely different type of situation. And the difference is so palpable in the data. Look, this is a measure of monthly GDP through the first month of this particular year. And the reason I'm showing you monthly is I got to just show you how different this typically looks. Look, the recession itself, the pandemic recession, was the deepest ever seen in the U.S. We saw about 15% of U.S. economic activity come to a halt in that first 2 months. Here's the key. It was the deepest recession ever. It was also the shortest. Recessions are measured peak to trough. That is to say, the height of economic activity to the bottom. This is a 2-month recession. Recovery started in May, even though the pandemic was still here. This was the mitigation phase of the recovery. Look, people don't sit on their hands waiting for someone to rescue them. I'm going to learn how to live my life. I'm going to learn how to run my business. I'm going to learn how to be a human being, even when I'm worried about this pandemic. And we caught 70% of that economic impact back, economic activity back by the end of the year, even as we faced by far and away the worst surge in the number of new cases to date. The only thing you can say about that huge surge at the end of last year was it caused the V to plateau a little bit. Well, now we're coming into recovery part 2, the post-COVID part. We just got the GDP numbers this morning, 6.4% growth in the first quarter of the year. You can already see the economy re-accelerating, getting forward again. And then, of course, after we're done with this, we get full recovery. That's when we get into I call that new normal post-expansion. Now, again, as already noted, a winner-loser type recovery. Here's a great way of looking at it. Take a look on the left-hand side. This is a breakdown of real consumer spending by type. And yes, you could see the complete freak out for the first couple months. Everybody was panicked. No one knew what they were dealing with. But then look at the bounce back. Services, of course, remain lagged. By the end of the year, they were still 5 or 6% below where they were pre-pandemic. But spending on non-durable goods and durable goods were way up relative to trend by the end of the year. And you can see that breakdown on the right-hand side. Online retailers had a fantastic year. Sporting goods stores, hobby stores, hardware stores, great year. Coming into this year, motor vehicles couldn't keep cars on the lot. They were flying out. Of course, we know supermarkets did well, so on and so forth. Who did badly? Well, food services, drinking places, clothing stores, that's a proxy for mall, and of course, gasoline stations. So it wasn't all pain. It was a mix of pain in some parts of the economy, offset by really hot numbers in other parts of the economy. And you can see that in some of these GDP statistics. Take a look at last year. Overall, the economy contracted by 3.5% in 2020 relative to 2019. That's a huge number. By the way, all of that can be traced to consumer services. Everything else kind of balanced out to a big net zero. Yes, there were some weak things in business investment, but there was positive numbers in, for example, residential real estate. Coming into the first quarter year, this is hot off the presses as of this morning. As noted, a 6.4% growth rate in the first quarter, led by a giant jump in consumer spending, added 7% to growth. Again, durable goods still way near the top, way above trend, 21% above where they were in the fourth quarter of 2019. However, services still down by about 5.7%. The tourism sector, particularly global tourism, fly-in tourism, still really suffering in the first quarter of this year. Structures, investment in structures is way down, but investment everywhere else, equipment, intellectual properties, residential investment, way, way up. Exports is a big problem. Exports are still way, way down. However, government spending, yet again, way, way up. So it isn't as clean as the entire economy is suffering, very much winners and losers. You could see that, for example, in profits. This is gross corporate profits, and I've broken up into domestic finance, domestic everybody else, and of course, some of the global situation. You know, we had one bad quarter for corporate profits, and then they came roaring back, and the second half of last year saw record corporate profits being earned. Now, again, some companies were suffering, but other companies were making excess profits. On net, it just about balanced out. And you can certainly see this regionally. If you go back to the Great Recession, obviously the Inland Empire was one of the worst hit places in the nation, one of the worst hit places in the state, ground zero when it came to the collapse of the subprime bubble. But this time around was almost like 2001, a completely different kind of hit, and one that actually largely missed the Inland Empire. The center part of California, the inland parts of California, have actually done much better than the coast. And that goes back to that fly-in tourism element that we were already talking about. Take, for example, taxable sales in the Inland Empire, which by Q3 had gotten back to trend, contrasted, of course, to Orange County and LA, who are way, way down. And again, thinking winners and losers on the right-hand side here, shooting days. This is filming days in LA County, way down. However, overall venture capital, record year last year across the state, lots of new money pouring into those kind of ventures. And with a big bounce back on the good side of things, well, so too came roaring back industrial production. We saw as much recovery in the first 6 months of this recovery as it took 4 years post-Great Recession. And you can see, again, that kind of winner and loser aspect of things on the right-hand side. Some sectors way behind, some sectors way ahead. And you can see it in trade. On the left-hand side is goods trade. That's actual physical products. The right-hand side is services, whether we're selling software overseas or tourism. Service trade, we're still way, way down. That's mainly tourism. But goods trade actually is back to where it was pre-pandemic, looking very, very strong. In fact, it was so strong that it caught the logistics industry, the global logistics industry, completely off guard. They had kind of pulled back, ready for a multi-year downturn. Didn't happen. Suddenly, huge demand. They're also dealing with, of course, issues with COVID. And lo and behold, we just can't keep up. The Port of LA, some of the biggest cargo records ever seen. They had to move cargo up to Oakland to deal with the overflow. That's how rough it was. And if you think this is going to slow down anytime in the near future, forget about it. This is the ISM, Institute of Supply Management, the diffusion index for manufacturing. The number we hit last month was the highest seen since the 1980s. So there's still a frenetic degree of demand in the manufacturing space. This is going to grow. It's only capacity that's keeping things slowed down. And by the way, another part of that capacity problem is in commodities. Look at lumber prices up 50% from where they were a year ago. Refined petroleum products up 55%. Iron and steel 37%. Fuels up 36%. Again, you can see the bounce back in demand for these products. The industries weren't ready for it, and lo and behold, prices are going up as a result of it. Now, some parts of the economy are simply not going to be able to recover until we get full control over this pandemic. Restaurants, hotels, transportation, entertainment, recreation. These are the sectors directly impacted by the supply constraints driven by, of course, the disease. Well, you will already see these numbers coming back up. This is high frequency data coming in April from Opportunity Insights. Restaurants and hotels are actually back to about 4.6%. Transportation started to come back. Entertainment, recreation starting to come back. Look, things are getting better. You're watching overall flights going up. Not as bad as it was a year ago. Not as good as 2 years ago, but getting there. As for hotels, you can see on the right-hand side. Now, Coachella is an interesting kind of mix. Take who did really well. Overall, Inland Empire did fine. High Sierra, Shasta, Cascade, drive-in tourism did just fine. But when you think of global tourism, whether it's for conferences, whether it's go to Disneyland, whether it's Canadians flocking to the Coachella Valley to enjoy the beautiful winter, those parts of the economy have suffered. I mean, think about Coachella. You lost the Coachella Valley, the tennis tournament, Indian Wells. You lost that for a couple of years. You lost, of course, Coachella for a couple of years. Big hits. But on the other hand, people were desperate to get out of their homes. Coachella Valley offered a close drive-in location just to get away, and that offset things. So you had the hit and the miss there in the middle of things. The area did better than San Diego, Orange County, but not quite as good as the High Sierra or Shasta Cascade. You can see that kind of blend in things. This is all driven by moving towards control. You know, we hit 4 million doses in one day not too long ago. About a month ago, Goldman Sachs suggested about 50% of our population has some degree of acquired immunity. What this means is we are really just a month or two away from achieving herd immunity, assuming everybody gets their shots or enough people get their shots. That's the biggest issue we're dealing with. You can see it in the data. The number of cases is coming down. Still a few hot spots, North Texas, Michigan, Minnesota dealing with some issues, a little bit in New Jersey. But here in California, we're doing great. Indeed, number of new cases per capita, one of the lowest in the nation right now, according to the more original statistics. We are over the hump. Our world is getting back to normal. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, of course, from a kind of a economic perspective is the jobs numbers. It's not that jobs aren't important, but they are by far and away the most negative part of the statistics, and often as the part that's focused on. Again, get the idea that many parts of the economy, whether it's industrial production or shipping, are doing pretty well right now, but the jobs numbers are still way down. Well, a lot of that has to do with the fact that supply shock hit sectors that tend to be very labor intensive. And that's why the jobs numbers seem so out of whack relative to economic activity. After all, economic activity in the first quarter of this year was just a hair below where it was Q4 2019. But of course, jobs are way, way down. It is those hard hit sectors, a combination of food services, local government, that's local education, local schools that aren't reopened, and of course, arts, entertainment, recreation, other services. If you think about California, February this year, we're down about 1.6 million jobs from where we were in 2020. And most of that, over half of it, can be traced to these four sectors. The good news is the economy is reopening. June 15th, everything's going to be back to normal, and you're going to see enormous number of these jobs, not all of them, but enormous number of these jobs coming back quickly. And if you again think about kind of the striation of economic activity, the Inland Empire looking pretty good. The unemployment rate down to about 7.5% in the region. Overall payrolls down about 6.3% from where they were the previous year. That makes, of course, the Inland Empire near the top in overall activity. Stockton's only down 3%, Fresno 5%, Sacramento 6%. Again, the inland parts of the state are doing much better than the coastal parts of the state. Getting a little closer to home, left-hand side labor force numbers. Look at the big drop-off in labor force in Orange County and LA. A lot of people, look, my convention center is closed, my hotel is closed. There's no point in me even looking for a job. I'm just going to sit here in temporary layoff. You're not seeing that. You don't see the decline in labor force in the Inland Empire. It's been steady over the course of the last year. Take a look at the right-hand side for the Inland Empire. This is through March. You get a very similar picture. Leisure and hospitality, state and local, that's basically local school districts, the majority of the pain. Everything else is kind of a wash. Yes, weaker numbers in manufacturing and other services, but that's been offset by huge growth in logistics and, of course, in construction, positive numbers there as well. But again, when you think about government, that's going to come back when schools reopen, which is in process now, and leisure and hospitality, that's going to come back as tourism starts to return. That's starting right now. Now, what about this idea of a K-shaped recovery? Why were so many economists so wrong at the beginning of this? A lot of it had to do with the unemployment rate, right? We know historically when unemployment rate goes up, it takes a long time to come down. Look at the Great Recession here on the left-hand side. You can see how unemployment went up, hit about 9%, took years and years to come down. This time it went up very sharply. It was almost 15% overall. But, and this is the but, it wasn't a traditional type of unemployment. The vast majority of people who lost their jobs at the beginning of this thing were folks who actually were on temporary layoff. They didn't lose their job. And of course, most of those folks in temporary layoff have gone back to work. Now, the regular unemployment, that is to say people who are in temporary layoff, who don't have a job but are looking for one, that has gone up. But that number right now is only about 5%. What this says is an enormous shock to the U.S. economy has created what you would call a mild recession in its wake. Not a huge one, a mild one. And going back to the idea about how some parts of the economy are doing pretty well right now, take a look at the U.S. job openings rate. The most recent number we got is for February, and it is basically back to where it was pre-pandemic. An enormous bounce back, tremendous number of job openings out there. No, the stories in the newspaper about some employers not being able to hire thing are actually true. There's a big skills mismatch going on out there at this point in time, which is why we're seeing this problem. And small businesses, yet again, suffering some of the worst. This came from the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Again, you can see highest level of job openings ever. Now, part of the issue, of course, is that we did see a shrink of the labor force. This is kind of important. This is this sort of hidden labor force issue. You can see on the right-hand side the decline in participation rates. I've broken it up into men and women. A little different pattern. By the way, the participation rate for men has dropped a little bit more than it did for women. It's not a she session, as the case may be, but there's little doubt that it's a different kind of pattern. For example, for women, a lot of the women who dropped out of labor force are women who have kids or of that age where they may have kids in the house. We know this has been tough on them. For men, actually, it's been a big decline, primarily for those in the retirement years. And this is kind of a critical issue because remember, we came into the pandemic with a labor shortage problem across the United States. The big question is will these older folks go back to work post-pandemic? Or are they just done? We're not going to deal with this anymore. If it's the latter, boy, labor shortages are going to come back as a big problem in the U.S. economy much quicker than anybody was anticipating, but we don't know. We just have to see. And what about this K-shaped recovery? You've heard a lot about that. Well, a couple things here. This kind of goes back to the idea that miserablism wins you headlines. When somebody came up with this idea of a K-shaped recovery, hey, how clever. But to be clear, every recovery is a K-shaped recovery. This is no different than any other one. People who are low skilled tend to suffer worse in the midst of a business cycle than people who are high skilled. There's nothing new about that. There's nothing unusual. And why you would have to highlight that this time, to me, strikes me as being really more about trying to make a clever headline than actually telling somebody about something new about this business cycle. Here is something new. Take a look at the left-hand side here. This is earnings growth by level of education. You remember we talked about during the Great Recession, there was a general malaise across the entire economy. And by the way, that hit wages for everybody. Look at the big slowdown in wage growth. Now, go forward just a little bit. Look what happened over the last year. No slowdown in income growth at any level of education. Yes, for those who've been laid off, you're having a tough time. You're not getting the income you need to keep your household moving forward. But for people still in the workforce, they had a good year last year. They didn't feel the impact of the recession. Their wages continued to go up. So again, a different type of situation. Small businesses. Yes, a tremendous number of small businesses still closed at the end of last year. But guess what? The second half of last year saw one of the greatest surge in business applications we've ever seen. So stop being worried about shuttery businesses. Start worrying more about helping these entrepreneurs get their new business off the ground, because they're going to be out there rocking and rolling and getting ready to go, opening up that new restaurant, that new personal care center. Tremendous degree of optimism. Now, what kind of economy will they have to sell something to? Will they be able to make it? The answer is absolutely. As already noted, this thing was going to be a relatively quick recovery, but then the government got involved with an excessive degree of fiscal and monetary policy. Fiscal policy, for example, $5 trillion in fiscal stimulus. We've never seen anything like that. That was well over 3 times what we did post-Great Recession, which, by the way, was a far worse economic cycle than this one. To give you some sense of how over the top this was, take a look at the right-hand side. This is personal income trends. Everything's zeroed at 2019. These are in trillions of dollars annualized. And you can see how things are going along smoothly. The pandemic hit, and what did you see? Well, you saw a drop-off in earnings. But remember, for those who didn't actually lose their jobs, it was a pretty good year, and earnings came down just a little bit and bounced back. Indeed, by the beginning of this year, overall earned income was back to where it was pre-pandemic, even with all those people out of work. The green line, by the way, is spending. Look how spending dropped off more than earnings did. People were going to start saving a bunch of money, even without the government getting involved. But the government, $5 trillion of spending, much of which was just fire hosed across the economy through those PPP loans and direct transfers to people. Fire hosed across the economy because everybody got it. Well, for every dollar of lost income, there were $3 of government support given back. And remember how odd this is. Let's keep something in mind. I understand the value of giving people money as an economic stimulus, as long as one important thing happens. For that to be true stimulus, people have to spend that money. Now, I'm sure unemployment benefits went to those families who lost their jobs, and that got spent. That's good stimulus. Help that family and help the economy. But if you're giving money to people who aren't having any income problems, which was everybody who kept their job, what happens to it? Well, remember, the problem in a supply shock type recession is they can't spend money. Giving people more money when their problem is they can't spend money doesn't help anybody. In fact, I would argue that the vast majority of this $5 trillion never did anything to stimulate the economy. In fact, what it did was it went right through into the financial system. Take a look here. This is a survey done after the first stimulus check. You remember that, what was it? I think it was $1,200 per family with some extra money per kids. 80% of that first stimulus check, 80%, went to being saved, paying down debt, or donated. This didn't help anybody. This didn't stimulate the economy. This just made this generation that much richer, by the way, by impoverishing the next generation through huge outgrowth of government debt. You can see it in the numbers. Now, again, this is good news for the economy this year, but let's think about it from a long-run perspective as well. Accumulative household savings. The yellow line on the left-hand side is on trend. The blue line is what actually has happened. Now, the first quarter of this year, $2.2 trillion of excess savings, excess household savings. Unbelievable number. Look at the banking system. Look at the huge jump in overall deposits. $3 trillion. $3 trillion in excess deposits sitting in the banking system. This is dry money that's going to drive a very rapid recovery. And it's also driving the financial markets into a massive froth. Take a look at the PE ratio, second highest ever seen behind only 1999, higher than it was in 1929. How is that possible? Look at Bitcoin running $60,000 a pop right now. To be clear, as an economist, I can tell you that the fundamental value of Bitcoin is zero. That it's running $60,000 should be a little bit concern to market regulators. And of course, this is all being driven by the fact, look at how much the portion of respondents invested in the stock market using government stimulus checks. If you were 18 to 34, 2/3 of these people put money into the stock market. This isn't the point of stimulus. It's not the point of stimulus. Now, they've done their job. Take a look at this number here. This is spending by low-income households and high-income households, also coming out of Opportunity Insight. Again, we needed to be worried about supporting low-income households. We've done that. Their spending is above where it was pre-pandemic. The people who are lagging right now are higher-income families. Don't feel sorry for them. Remember, their problem is that they can't spend money until the pandemic goes away, and they will spend money. Indeed, I hope you're booking your airline tickets for the second half of the year right now, because they're going to get expensive really quick. Now, mind you, our generation didn't need this boost. Take a look at the left-hand side. This is the financial obligations ratio. This is a percent of income spent on debt. It had peaked prior to the Great Recession because of falling interest rates and a low pace of consumer debt growth. We came into the pandemic with the lowest ever financial obligation ratio. Now it's even lower. We took advantage of low interest rates to refi our homes. The government's giving us checks and we're paying down our mortgage. Isn't that wonderful? Well, it depends on what you mean by wonderful. It's wonderful for us. It's terrible for our kids. We borrowed $3 trillion last year. This year, we're going to borrow $4 trillion more, $7 trillion in new domestic debt. You know, history is not going to look kindly at our generation. Our kids and grandkids are going to be like, let me get this straight. These people enriched themselves like nobody's business and left up with $7 trillion of government debt. How is this right? And they have a point. Now, when we're talking about government debt, let's talk about a government that doesn't have a debt problem. Our government, the state government, California. Remember Gavin Newsom's $54 billion deficit? Turns out revenues coming in the state of California are above trend right now, not below trend. There is no deficit, not much less a $50 billion deficit. Good news, to say the least, but I do love how they keep calling it a surplus. Of course, it isn't just the federal government getting involved. Obviously, the Federal Reserve has also put out $3 trillion in new money through asset accumulation. The balance sheet's off the chart. By the way, they're not the only one doing it. The Bank of England's doing it. The European Central Bank is doing it. Indeed, most central banks across the globe are putting money in. And the question is, why? Look, Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen had to use a massive amount of asset purchases, quantitative easing, because they were dealing with a really true monumental problem in the United States. There was a collapse in household wealth. The financial system was being pushed to the edge of insolvency. It was scary times. What is Powell fighting? None of these issues. I already showed you profits. There's no losses in the financial system. Commercial bank delinquencies have barely budged. Household wealth is growing, not shrinking. What war are you fighting? Not the last one, that's for sure, but he's acting as if he is. And of course, as a result of that, the money supply is growing like crazy. Now, to be clear, you have seen an uptick in inflation. You are seeing interest rates rising, but this isn't the inflation dividend, not yet. This is just the economy recognizing, hey, guess what? Things are getting back to normal. It's okay. But one thing you have to do is take a look at the left-hand side here. The blue line is probably the most important one. That's what economists like to call the unit money supply. It's the amount of money in the economy divided by the size of the economy. And you could see at some level why economists are a little bit blasé about inflation. After all, the unit money supply kind of bottomed out somewhere around 2000, and it's been growing consistently through 2019 with no inflation. But keep something in mind. That's because unit money supply was actually relatively low from a low run standpoint. And let's be clear, the experiment we're doing right now, look at the explosion in the money supply, 25% year over year. We've never seen more. Now, this is not something we can just ignore and pretend it's not relevant. This is so far outside the realm of monetary experiments. To say we know we're not going to have inflation, to not be worried about it at all, candidly, is just, it's craziness. And yet that's exactly what Powell's talking about. Inflation, whatever, it's fine. No, it's not fine. Now, when will we have inflation? Well, that's a little harder. I can tell you that. I know we have the chance of inflation. First time in 20 years I've said that, and it could be ugly. But when does it hit? The answer is, to get inflation, you need a couple things. You need a lot of money, new money. That's being generated like it was back in the 70s, the last time we had inflation. But you need two more things. You need to have a tight economy, and that's where we're not at yet. Unemployment is still high. Capacity utilization is still low. This has to tighten up, and that's not going to happen until the end of this year. And then you need one more thing to really get inflation rock and rolling. You need a big increase in aggregate demand that might be generated by, I don't know, a $2 or $3 trillion infrastructure plan. Now, listen, I like the plan. I like the idea that we are going to head and start investing in kids, investing in infrastructure. Couldn't agree more. This is so long overdue. But let's keep in mind, when you do this, with all that money's out there and the economy's already tight, this is going to cause inflation. So I'm very worried about 2023, 2024, the potential for, yes, big increases in inflation. We don't know yet. The Federal Reserve has time to back off. Will they? Doesn't seem like it right now. And of course, with all that money floating around the system, you are starting to see the impact that in some of our asset markets. One of the big asset markets we're seeing that is housing, which of course has seen an enormous bounce in activity. You've all heard about this. Everybody's telling us how terrible it's going to be. Second half layer, sales took off. Inventories collapsed. Nationally, tightest housing market ever seen since we started collecting this data back in the 1980s. Home prices jumped from 3.7% to 10.4%. And then, of course, if you look around California, even more so. And of course, with a big bounce back in housing activity, so too it's been a bounce back in housing construction. How different could these two cycles be? Last time around, a massive collapse in building. This time around, a big bounce. If this doesn't tell you what a different business cycle it is, not sure what will. Now, some of this is long run. That is to say, we were already due for a bounce back in housing activity just because, remember, housing had been flat in 2019, largely because of the tax changes that went into place in the year earlier and rising interest rates. Those had faded. People have been buying more homes. We were going to see a bounce this year anyway. But then you go ahead and you throw in the pandemic, where you have people with a tremendous amount of money sitting in their accounts. They don't know what to do with it, but they think they might want a bigger house. Throw into that mix, people are stuck inside. They need an office that's away from the kids' room. That makes you want a house. Throw into the mix the fact that interest rates for mortgages dropped well below 3% for the first time in a very, very long time. And you are, of course, able to set off that virtuous, or depending on your point of view, vicious cycle, which is to say, housing markets are very contingent on people's expectations. You know, in 2019, everybody's like, the market's weak. Maybe I'll sit back and see if prices fall. I'll go ahead and get that killer of a deal. And everybody pulls back, making the market a little bit weaker. That's the other side of it. This time around, basically, everybody started going out to buy that home when they realized there was nothing to buy. And now everybody's in panic freak mode and everybody's rushing around like crazy, buying anything they can. And of course, that means the market is hot, hot, hot. Now, is it a bubble? Absolutely not. Remember, I told you we came into the pandemic with great fundamentals. They're still there. Take a look, for example, at mortgage payments as a percent of disposable income. They were already the lowest ever prior to the pandemic. And because we all refied, it's even lower now, below 4%. On the right-hand side is median monthly owner costs for Orange County and LA. They have been falling, not rising. Now, I know prices in Southern California are going up, but incomes have been going up faster for homeowners. And of course, interest rates have been going down. This is not an affordability crisis in California. It's a supply crisis. And you can see how clean the mortgage markets are. No problems there whatsoever. Even the forbearance plans, people have been fading away. There's no foreclosure wave. It's not going to be a foreclosure wave. Forget about that if you hadn't figured about it. In California, whatever happened nationally happened even worse here. You saw inventories drop to 1 month supply. You've heard stories of 40 offers on one home for sale. Those are true. Indeed, sales fell the first couple of months of this year, but that was simply driven not by the lack of demand, but by the fact that there's just nothing to buy. And home prices are taking off here in California. Again, median prices going up very, very rapidly. Looking out in the Inland Empire, Riverside County, home prices leaped from a little above 400,000 to over 450,000 in just a half a year. You can see on the right-hand side, Riverside up 13% median. Paris, 11%, Temecula, 11%, Moreno Valley, 9%, Corona, 9%, big numbers. What about apartments? Well, they're not looking as good as the single family market, but they're not as bad as people say they are either. You probably heard these stories about 30 to 40 million people who may be evicted. Well, not quite. In fact, the number of renters who aren't paying their mortgage is only a couple percentage points below where it was a year ago. This isn't true. It never was true. Remember, not that many renters are out of work. For the renters who are out of work, they're getting pretty generous unemployment benefits. It isn't that type of situation. But again, there's no doubt that the rental markets are hurting. What's happening here? It isn't people fleeing so much. It's more of a liquidity problem. You see the biggest drops in the big cities where basically things have slowed down quite a bit. You built a new apartment building in downtown LA or downtown San Francisco. People aren't moving in right now. Yeah, it's hurting you, but the overall markets are still very, very tight. And if you take a look out in the Coachella Valley, you can see just how good the numbers are. Only Palm Springs, which is very tourist-based, has seen any kind of issues as the case may be. But if you're looking at Indio or Riverside overall, very solid numbers here. Rents continue to go up, almost no increase in vacancy. Apartment owners will catch up really quick. Now, what can you say about California's new housing? Well, it picked up in 2020, just a little bit from 2019. Very good news, to say the least, but not good enough. As I've been talking about for many years, since I've been doing the events out with, of course, the Riverside County Development, I've talked about the lack of housing and how critical it is. It's a supply problem, a supply problem, a supply problem. It's not affordability, as already noticed. We're not building enough. And, think about back when we were in the bubble, in pre-Great Recession bubble, we were building over 50,000 units a year, 50,000 units a quarter. This time around, the state's not even doing half that. And remember, for the governor to reach his lofty goals of millions of new units, you need to be much higher than we were back in 2004. We're not anywhere close to that. And we saw it yet again, big population movement out of the state. By the way, this isn't taxes, it's not regulations. These are people looking for housing, period. And where are they finding it? Arizona, Oregon, San Diego, Idaho, Florida. They're moving to find housing, as simple as this. And this is a critical issue. This is long-run labor force growth. This is long-run labor force growth for the United States and California. And, for decades, California always had lower labor force growth than the United States, which is why we are able to grow faster. But something happened in the 90s. We constrained our housing markets, and suddenly our labor force started growing just as fast as the United States. And then in the last couple of years, slower than the U.S. overall. Now, this is a huge issue. Remember, if you want employers to be here, they need workers. And if you don't build housing, they're not going to have workers to hire. Why did Tesla move from the East Bay to Texas? It's not regulations. It's not taxes. Elon Musk still has plenty of operations in the state. Indeed, he's doing all sorts of aerospace stuff down here. He's moving Tesla to Texas because he needs assembly workers, and there are no assembly workers left to hire in the Bay Area. He's moving because of workforce. Now, the Inland Empire, even a more dramatic picture. The Inland Empire has been that source of housing, that source of population growth until this last expansion, where you didn't see any growth at all. The Inland Empire picked up the bad habits of those economies to the east of it. And the area desperately needs more housing, and it's not getting built. And if you think about the Coachella Valley, these are some data from the American Community Survey. And to be clear, this is a PUMA designation. The population numbers might look a little different than what you're used to, because I'm just using to the two pumas that represent the most of the Coachella Valley. But you can see the population growth from 14 to 15 and the housing supply growth. Overall population growth out there was actually slow, only 0.7% per year. And by the way, that was driven mainly by older folks, and whereas the population unit folks went down by 4% per year from that 2014 to 2019. Now, if you look on the left-hand side, you say, well, what? There's lots of new housing. Almost 22,000 new housing units were put into place in the Coachella Valley. That's a good number, big, solid number. The problem with that, of course, is only about half of it went to residents, only about 12,000 units. And because of the movement of older people, those are smaller households, hence the weak population growth. What happened to the rest of the units? Well, the vast majority of them went into recreation or other. These are simply homes being used as Airbnb or second homes and things like this. And I don't have a problem with that per se, but you got to remember that if you're going to compete with tourism, compete housing stock for older folks who want that retirement life, you have to build enough housing to get past those sources of demand and be able to get your labor force to expand. Take a look on the right-hand side here. This is the population by level of education who live in the area. And again, high-skilled folks are growing, particularly seniors who are not using that education anymore. And there's been a decline in people with a high school degree or less. Why is that an issue? Remember, while there's lots of components to Coachella Valley that are important, the biggest one is still tourism, and tourism needs those low-skilled workers. They're not available. Even now when the area is not up to snuff, talk to any hotel managers. They can't get cleaning staff. Talk to restaurants. They can't get people in their kitchens. You need lots more housing than you're building right now. It's a critical issue. You have to expand more if you want to be able to compete tomorrow. It's as simple as that. I realize it's a long-run conversation, but it's an important conversation. And again, the only thing you can say about the Coachella Valley is that, yes, they had better numbers in 2020, but not good enough. There needs to be a lot more units out there. It's just not kicking into place. On the non-residential side, a little bit different picture, big decline in permits. There's no doubt about it, a lot of panic in the commercial market. But remember, most of that panic was based on the potential for major meltdowns in the financial markets that haven't occurred. By the end of last year, sales were picking up. Cap rates are nice and steady. Overall loans still look good. And no major delinquencies already showed. And the banks are making it easier to borrow. All good news. But what kind of real estate's going to do well on the back end of this thing? Well, if you take a look at the numbers, industrial, which is so important in the Inland Empire, has proven its worth. It's office space, of course, that's taken a big hit because, of course, from the work from home phenomenon. Take a look at some of the numbers out here. Let's focus a little bit on the Inland Empire industrial space. Again, very good numbers there. Vacancy rates dropped in the fourth quarter of the year. A lot of new absorption. Remember, people are just packing this stuff because people are buying more and more stuff from the house. A little closer to home, you can see what's happening. Office markets out in the Coachella. Vacancy rates, oddly enough, are down a little bit, although from a relatively high number. Rents are steady as the case may be, but overall office space in the Inland Empire is actually down right now. On the retail side, obviously a lot of pain because, well, people are buying stuff on the internet, as the case may be. Overall permits for the Inland Empire, nice and steady from the 2019, unlike the rest of the state. As for Coachella Valley, it was a weak year, no doubt about it, 2020. Not much of a surprise, again, given some of the business disruptions, but I think this is going to be a relatively short situation. Now, what happens at the back end? What about the long run? What is the new normal here? As I already noted, pandemics have been with humanity since the dawn of time. There is no new normal. People live their lives afterwards. But it will accelerate trends that are already in place. One of the biggest ones, of course, is, yes, the movement to buying stuff online, as already mentioned. You can see on the right-hand side the share of retail sales going to e-commerce. Now, this is something that we know has been going on. We know it's been accelerated by this, and it begs the question, what are we going to do about retail? Now, I'm not talking about destination retail. If it's a fancy shopping mall that tourists hang out at, or if it's attached to all sorts of living things like gyms and movie theaters, you're going to do okay. But if you're a typical suburban shopping mall, you're having a tough time right now keeping your tenants in place because they're seeing a big decline in their business. We have a problem. We have a problem in the United States with too much retail space. This is retail space per capita in these different countries. Look how big these numbers are for the United States, Canada, and Australia. We need to repurpose this. By the way, one of the most exciting conversations going on in Sacramento right now is some ways of doing this. They're talking about, for example, a new plan that would allow a certain portion of retail to be automatically rezoned retail, residential, mixed use. Fantastic idea. Please support your local state legislator to get that bill across the finish line. It's a great idea. It's going to kill two birds with one stone. We know that. And as for office, again, I want to spend a little time here. Look, work from home. A lot of people have been doing that for non-essential businesses, and you're seeing offices across Southern California empty. Now, will work from home become the new de facto way of running a company? The answer is no. First of all, business people, including me, I've had my folks working from home for the last year. They've done great, but I've also appreciated where the problems have arisen. It's hard for training. It's hard for collaboration. It's hard for innovation. It's hard for clients. Just understanding how your employees are feeling, seeing the body language in the break room can be one of the most important things any manager will learn about his employees. You got to have a space. And on top of that, take a look at the right-hand side here. Only 25% of people said they like to work from home. 33% said no more than 1 day per week. That's it. 33%, no more than 1 day per week. More people want to be in the office than want to be home. Simple as that. Yet again, another reason to want office space. But people are going to be able to work from home. On the left-hand side, take a look at traditional office-using employment. That's the second one down. For pre-pandemic, about 11% of all working days were work from home. In the pandemic, 43%. And the expectation is afterwards, 30% of all office days will be worked from home. So tripling the number. That means, of course, that most offices are going to shrink their footprint. Now, why is this important? Well, I want you to think about it this way. This is not the end of downtowns. I argue downtowns are going to become more important than ever before. And the reason for that, of course, has to do with why downtowns exist in the first place. There's a concept in economics called forces of agglomeration. Look, downtowns are expensive. Tall buildings cost more per square foot. Their ergo rents cost more per square foot. Downtowns are packed. They're busy. They have traffic. Commuting in, commuting out is complicated. So ergo, if there wasn't some offsetting benefit to being downtown, downtowns shouldn't exist. What's the benefit? Being downtown, you're close to vendors, you're close to clients, you're close to a liquid labor market. You have the panache of a downtown type location. Now, imagine, take a particular downtown, you pick Irvine, downtown LA. They suddenly, all the companies there shrink their footprint, say on average 15% square foot per employee, because a lot of their employees are working from home. Suddenly there's a lot of space downtown, more businesses move downtown. I expect that downtown's dense job zones are going to be more important than ever post-pandemic. And as you know, the biggest problem with the Inland Empire economy overall is a lack of a downtown. San Bernardino, Riverside, Ontario, these parts of the county would be natural downtowns, but zoning has, of course, prevented that from occurring. And as a result of that, the region lacks a lot of those dense job environment, high-paying jobs that are typically located in downtowns. Now more than ever, the Inland Empire, if you want to keep those high-paid jobs, you want to keep those professional service jobs, you need to invest in downtowns. You've got to have that kind of zoning in place. And that's true for the Coachella Valley as well. What's downtown for the Coachella Valley? How do you add to it? How do you intensify it? How do you think about these new trends? It's a big issue and something that everybody has to focus on over the course of the next few years. Phew. I don't think I have one breath. So wrapping it all up, a lot of conversation there, but it's not good. It's tragic. It's a natural disaster. Millions of people have lost their lives. Millions more have suffered. And our hearts have to go out to those folks. But like natural disasters, the V was the only logical outcome. The V is exactly what's occurred. Yes, it stalled briefly in the fourth quarter of last year because of the huge surge, but we see it coming back out, 6.4% this morning. We're talking double-digit Q2, and really we anticipate by the end of this year, early next year, we're going to have that output gap completely erased. In other words, a very short business cycle. What happens at the back end of that? The new roaring 20s, an economy that is exploding because of all the dry powder sitting there, because of all this stimulus sitting in the accounts. So yeah, we're going to come out of this rapid, and the next couple of years are going to be hot. Now, what can put this forecast off? In the very short run, a new variant of the virus pops up that is, in fact, impacted by the vaccines. Hasn't happened yet, but it could happen. In the midterm, obviously, we have issues with the new financial bubble. Housing's on fire. The stock market's on fire. Now, are they dangerous bubbles? Not yet. There's got to be other circumstances that have to be included in order to make them dangerous bubbles. But, again, these things tend to feed on themselves. I could see a bubble happening over the next couple of years. We have the issue with rising interest rates, the issue with inflation, the issue, of course, with the explosion of government debt. All these are going to have some impact on the next expansion. And yes, some of these may actually be the seeds that give rise to the next recession. We don't know yet. There's a lot in front of us, a lot of obviously good growth, but a lot of fears as well. But ultimately, the biggest issue of all is the same issue we're dealing with when we came into the pandemic: miserablism, the inability to appreciate the good things, even as we go to tackle the bad things. In this day and age, it seems like you have to be able to tell everybody that that glass is half full and emptying rapidly if you want anybody to pay attention to you. But that kind of situation, that kind of rhetoric drives bad policy, not good policy. Whether we're talking about the over-aggressive fiscal stimulus, the massive outgrowth of government debt that, again, future generations are not going to look kindly upon. The fact that we managed to conflate wearing a mask over your mouth with the culture wars. What is wrong with us? It's crazy. It's no consideration for the next generation. It's only us, now. It's like we've turned into a nation of 4-year-olds. That's not healthy. So take a step back, understand, yes, there are things in our world that we need to do better on. And I'm here with you to push to get those good things done. But at the same time, let's appreciate all the good things that are happening and rely on those good things to help us better tackle the bad things. Keep an eye in the long run. Keep an eye on it because it's still important. And that's that. Again, lots of material there. I know I talked awful fast, and let's go ahead and see if we have any questions.
Hey, Dr. Thornberg, we have a question here for you. And just a reminder, everybody, we're monitoring the Q&A and the chat for any questions. How will potential inflation affect interest rates, and will that have an impact on housing prices?
Yeah, good questions. Okay, so how does inflation hit interest rates? Well, right off the bat, remember that interest rates are a combination of the real interest rate, which has to do with how much you want to borrow, combined with what I would call the basic inflation rate. So inflation rate goes up, interest rates must go up with it. But then there's another element to that, which is the risk, because inflation tends to create a lot of risk in whatever that inflation add-on is to interest rates. And lenders want a return for that. So it pushes up inflation, it pushes up interest rates more than the actual inflation rate. If inflation goes from 2% to 4%, 2% to 5%, then you can expect, say, interest rates to go up by 3% plus. So maybe it's 4%. So that means a big increase in interest rates. And yeah, that's going to have an impact on housing markets. Now, will it cause it to collapse? History says no, but it will cause it to slow. It will cause it to slow pretty sharply and obviously be kind of a weak spot in the economy. It's going to have an impact on consumers who are going to get frustrated. Obviously, inflation is nothing that people like to deal with. It creates a lot of consumer confidence issues. So there are problems in inflation. Yeah, I can agree it needs to be heated up a little bit. We've been dealing with a number of years of below target inflation, but they're overdoing it. They're stomping on the gas pedal too much, and they're creating a dangerous circumstance. And remember, the worst recession prior to the Great Recession was the Volcker recession at the start of the 1980s. That, of course, was driven by Volcker's efforts to constrain inflation. Now, yet again, it may not be the inflation you're scared about. It may be the forces that fight inflation that'll cause the next downturn. It remains to be seen.
have another question here for you, Dr. Thornberg. What policies or proposals will be most beneficial to spurring workforce housing in the region?
Well, you have to ask yourself, why don't we build enough workforce housing? And the answer is because we don't build enough housing, period. And when you don't build enough housing, then you tend to get limited towards just the high-end stuff where you can make the biggest profit margins. So you need to expand the economy overall, the housing market overall. Now, how do you do that? Combination of things. The first thing is obviously zoning. If you don't have the land zoned for the construction, you can't build it. Now, that's less of a problem in Coachella than it is in other places, but it's still a problem. The second big issue you're dealing with has to do with what are called permits and fees. We have in California created a situation by which we say all local infrastructure, not all, but most local infrastructure is funded by fees being put on new construction. Well, that's not how it's supposed to work. And everybody's supposed to invest in infrastructure, not just new buildings. Everybody should be making that investment. And by the way, thinking about this Biden infrastructure plan, thinking about the state and the state's massive windfall they're facing right now, what a great time to use some of this money to help defray those costs. Again, if you can have sewers and parking funded by the government and the developer picks up the housing cost, this is going to be a lot easier. You're going to get a lot more stuff built. So that's another way another tool you have. And then last but not least is just ease of doing it. How long does it take to get a permit? How long does it take to get an inspector out to your site? These are all important issues that you have to face, you have to deal with. And yeah, that means taking a close look at local government and what they do, how they do it, and why they do it. You know, I've said for a very long time, the biggest problem of all in California for housing is the fact that we've set up a situation by which local governments are constrained to basically fund themselves through taxes on their business base, which means since residents don't give them a lot of money, but cost them a lot of money, they don't really want residential. I'd rather have some other city build residential and I'll take all the industrial zones. No, it can't work that way. So if you could create a situation in California by which local government benefited from having residents, say, for example, if all sales tax went into a pool and were distributed across cities on the basis of how many people you had, perhaps if you got rid of Prop 13 or at least allow for some sort of special assessment on property taxes for local government, again, that could go a long ways towards helping local governments want more housing. So there's a bunch of different barriers. It's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts, and you got to kind of go through all these little things and try to fix them. We haven't.
Great. Well, follow-up questions here. How interconnected is educational attainment to economic growth within the region? Will the Inland Empire be overly impacted by mass retirements from the boomer generation and loss of skills?
Well, to be clear, well, there's a lot to pack in there, right? And let me start out by talking about housing yet again, since that's the topic we just came off of. You think about Coachella Valley, beautiful place, a lot of retirees want to be there, which is great, but you have to build for them, and you have to build for the over weekend tourists, which means again more housing there, and then on top of that, you got to build for the workforce to support tourism and the seniors. The region needs more housing. It's as simple as that, as I already talked about. And that's going to become more intense as more, we've already seen it in the last 5 years. The population of 60 and above is growing 7% per year in the Coachella Valley, where those younger is falling. So you can already see the mismatch and how that's going to create problems for the local economy. You want the Coachella Valley to expand its economic footprint. You don't want it to be completely reliant on tourism. But again, without a workforce, you can't do that. So you have to keep thinking about, how do I get more housing? How do I build this? How do I support this situation? Now, as for boomers retiring from a general sense, yeah, boomers retiring is creating labor shortage issues for the entire United States. Now that yet again goes back to immigration. This is a self-imposed problem. If we had an immigration policy that worked, that actually allowed people to come to the United States through legal mechanisms, this wouldn't even be a conversation right now. But we have put into play, well, actually, we don't have any immigration policy in place. That's the worst thing of all. We can't figure out what we want to do. And as a result of that, you could see the crisis yet again growing at the border. Those people want to be here, and I don't care what level of education they have. These people want to be here. They want to work hard. They want to have a chance. These are the kind of people this nation needs. And we're just not doing anything about it. It's very frustrating. We need to open the borders. We need to have a solid immigration policy that allows the right kind of people who want to be in this nation to come to this nation. And by the way, by the right kind of people, I don't mean PhDs from Eastern Europe. I mean, you want to be here, you want to work.
Thank you, Dr. Thornberg. Continue on. We have a few more questions, and we just let everyone know that you can still put those questions in the Q&A or chat. Next question is, how do you foresee policy proposals such as the indirect source rule impacting logistical growth within the region?
I have no idea what that rule is, Joaquin, so I may not be able to answer that particular question. Let's talk about infrastructure in general, right? We're talking about industrial, right? Industrial space.
It says, how do you foresee policy proposals such as the indirect source rule impacting logistical growth within the region?
Yeah. Well, next question. I'm not sure what that is, so I don't want to answer something I don't understand.
The next question is, do you see the decline of the Salton Sea as a barrier to economic development in the area?
Yes, I do. The Salton Sea's biggest issue, of course, is the environmental problem, right? We know as a tourist destination, that's long gone. It is, of course, a place that continues to dry up. Now, there's been some interesting developments out there. I've been reading a lot about the lithium that apparently is floating around the bottom of that lake. There's actually a pretty good opportunity out there, right? What you need to do is you need to get that thing cleaned up. Might figure out some new water supply. And if you can make it economically valuable to work there, say through collecting lithium, which they call white gold, there could be a really interesting opportunity out there, a real good play to help get it cleaned up and help, if you will, stem the potential of growing economic disaster that is indeed happening out there when it continues to dry up, and of course, exposing the local environment to all those toxins that lie on the bottom of that particular lake after years of runoff. Here's the big issue, though. We've known the Salton Sea is a problem for 20 years, and we haven't done anything. We've talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. We haven't done anything. It's time to do something. This bureaucratic stall that we've been in on this and so many other issues in California can't continue. We have to start making decisions. We have to start doing things. A lack of motion is worse than anything else at this point in time. And that's exactly where we are. We're just frozen in time. That's true for a lot of the United States. It's the same conversation about immigration. It's just frozen. It stopped. We have to get back to the job of government governing. And that means making decisions. It means breaking a few eggs, figuring it out. But again, it's nothing.
The current housing market does not seem sustainable. How soon do you think it will be till it corrects itself, or will it?
It's totally sustainable. It's totally sustainable right now. Again, debt to equity ratios, very low. Debt burden's very low. Housing cost burden's very low. I forgot to talk about that one slide where I pulled down the data on Coachella. The share of rent burden households, the share of mortgage cost burden households in Coachella Valley fell sharply between 2014 and 2019. It's not affordability. It's supply, and I probably should mention supply. You got to build more housing. Simple. Don't worry about it. It's going to be a couple of years before this thing becomes scary. And I doubt it will, because I think it'll cool off on its own. So I'm not worried about housing except for the lack of it.
What is your opinion about the impact of potential higher tax rates on income and capital gains on private investment?
No one likes paying taxes, people. I don't like paying taxes. You don't like paying taxes. However, we all love government services. We all love roads. We all love power grids that work. We all want hospitals that are functional. We all want the police to be there when we need help. You can't have your cake and eat it too. The reality is we're going to have to see taxes go up in the United States. They have to, period. We cannot afford Social Security and Medicare. We cannot afford the $7 trillion we just borrowed without raising taxes. It has to happen. Now, what kind of taxes should be raised? That's a different debate. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that. What I do know is that higher taxes don't destroy economies. They don't. Bad taxes do. You want to figure out what a good tax is versus a bad tax, but not taxes by themselves. So stop worrying about paying taxes. Appreciate that at some point in time, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We want these services supplied to us. And instead focus on making sure it's a good tax plan. And a good tax plan, to be clear, is small taxes on broad bases. This state is inordinately fond of big taxes on small bases. That's why I like to say that California is not a high tax state, we're a dumb tax state.
Next question, how will businesses continue to open and provide a safe work environment if they are unable to find employees because of government programs giving extra funding to those non-working and with possible lawsuits from employees because of possible coronavirus contacts? We have seen both already happen at Coachella Valley and Riverside County.
Yeah, well, a couple things here. First of all, the argument that people are staying out of the labor force because unemployment is so generous, there's not a lot of reality in that statement, okay? The real issue is that the people who are out of work are primarily out of work from restaurants and hotels, and the people who need help are primarily manufacturing companies and various sorts of companies like that. So there's a skill mismatch more than anything else. Now, again, the key here to getting people back in the rooms is basically vaccinations. Go on, get your shot. Anybody who's complaining about not being able to reopen your business and then you refuse to get your shot, come on, get be part of the plan, will you please? Go out and get your damn shot and be part of the fix. Ultimately, the biggest issue, yet again, of lack of housing that's overall constraining the potential workforce. It's as simple as that. So build, and you'll have people there for you. So that yet again means, you're going to have to maybe allow some housing in a lot that you like to have empty. Again, you can't have your cake and eat it too. We have to be consistent in terms of what we want for the economy and what we're willing to allow happen around us.
This will be the last question, Dr. Thornberg. Just as COVID-19 created a large migration of residents to the Coachella Valley, should we also expect a mass exodus as COVID dissipates?
Well, it's a good question because obviously the only good data we have right now for the Coachella Valley is 2019. I was using the 2019 American Community Survey. It's hard to see what actually happened in the short run. Yes, I do think a number of people moved out there temporarily. Their offices closed. Why not? I think that's been one of the supports for the region over the last year, which I think is good. And I think a lot of those folks will go ahead and leave, head back to where they were. But it's okay. Remember, there was a housing shortage in the first place. If a few of the temporary folks move back to downtown San Francisco or downtown Irvine, those units will be quickly refilled by other folks. I'm not worried about that. Don't worry about population. Worry about housing.
Thank you very much.
I'm a bit of a one-track cowboy today, Joaquin. I apologize for that.
Thank you, Dr. Thornberg. Lots of good information provided today. As Supervisor Perez stated, we have an opportunity to invest in our economy, to improve our economy in a way that looks different, works better, and includes everyone. I'd like to once again thank our guest speakers, Supervisor Perez, Jeff Van Wagenen, and Dr. Christopher Thornberg. And thank you to our sponsors, We greatly appreciate your support for the 2021 Coachella Valley Business Conference. After today's conference, registered guests will receive a virtual goodie bag via email. So don't forget to check your email for an email from gov.delivery to see what you've received. And so to close, I thank you all for connecting with us today. We are hopeful that we'll get to see you all in person for our 2022 Coachella Valley Business Conference and Economic Forecast. Have a wonderful day.